What's going on, guys? On today's book versus film, the subject is something that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is Matilda. And for those of you who don't know, Matilda is the story of a little girl who's very smart and very gifted, and she lives with her parents, and they're rather distant because of how, honestly, just how stupid they are. And she goes to this school where her principal is more of a bully, and principal's name is Miss Trunchbull, or what they call her is the Trunchbull. And Matilda ends up forming this bond with her teacher, Miss Honey, who's very understanding and very caring for Matilda when nobody else really seems to care about her at all. And Matilda ends up discovering she has like these telekinesis powers, or she's psychic abilities kind of thing. And she ends up being able to fight against the Trunchbull, who is basically tormenting these kids. And it is a kid's book. It's written by Rald Dahl, who also wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and James and the Giant Peach and the BFG and Boy and Witches and tons of other books that have also been turned into movies. And the movie is directed by Danny Devito, who also plays Matilda's father, and it is one of his best freaking movies, I think. Simply because the book is so old. I think it was written in like 1957 or something like that. Hold on, let me check. Sorry, I was wrong. It was written in 1947. So yeah, since the book is so old, there's a lot of changes from the book to the movie. There's a lot. Some of the changes don't really matter all that much. For instance, in the book, the whole story takes place in London, and in the movie, the whole story takes place in America. And in the book, Matilda starts preschool at 5, and I think in the movie it's like 6.5. Just things like that don't really matter. I think it was just easier for them to film it in America than it was just to go to London. I mean, it's not like a giant production movie. They're not going to go all the way to a different country just to film this kid's book into a movie. But one of the subtle differences that I noticed from the book to the movie that doesn't really matter all that much, but still one that kind of stuck out to me a lot, is Matilda's dad is a really, really shady guy. He's a used car dealer. I mean, it doesn't get more shady than that. And some of the shady stuff he does has made it to where now the FBI is after him and they're investigating him. Like in the book, it doesn't really put any emphasis on the FBI after him. Like every once in a while it mentions how there's different cars parked outside of the house, and that's basically it. But in the movie, the FBI is way more involved, and there's actual characters and like revolving around them, and there's more scenes with just FBI. It's just, it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't really matter, but it's just something that I noticed. And like I said earlier, Matilda and Miss Honey have this weird kind of like bond. It's like Matilda is the daughter that Miss Honey never had, and Miss Honey is the mom that Matilda always wanted. And Miss Honey ends up inviting Matilda over to her cottage, and they end up drinking tea, and they're having a grand old time, telling stories, and just really connecting. And Miss Honey ends up telling Matilda her story. You find out that Miss Honey grew up with her aunt because her dad ended up committing suicide. And I say that because it seems like, and it's kind of implied, that her aunt might have ended up killing her dad. And she grows up with her aunt, and her aunt still has all of her possessions and all of her belongings, and she wants them back really bad, and then come to find out that her aunt is the Trunchbull. To rewind a little bit, all the bad stuff that happens at the school with Miss Trunchbull, she is absolutely horrible to these kids. She throws a girl by her pigtail, she swings her over the school fence. She makes this really kind of pudgy kid sit down and eat this entire cake and get sick in front of the entire student body to kind of humiliate him. And she has this contraption, and I don't really remember what it's called. I think it's like a knockoff of the Iron Maiden kind of thing, which is like a mummy-shaped tomb casket thing that has like spikes on the inside of it. I think that's what it is. Where she throws these kids in there for hours at a time as a way of like detention or timeout. The kids used to get back at her for things. For instance, one time, Miss Trunchbull was pouring herself a glass of water, and a newt fell out of the jug and fell into the glass. And she started freaking out. She was blowing up on the class and making threats and trying to figure out who did it. And this is a turning point because Matilda is staring at this glass, and she's getting more and more frustrated that she has to deal with this horrible woman. And the glass starts to kind of move a little bit, and she starts whispering to herself, tip it over, tip it over, tip it over. And then all of a sudden the glass tips over, and the newt gets everywhere, and the water gets everywhere, and all of a sudden she finds out that she has these telekinetic powers and she can move stuff. And she goes and tells Miss Honey about this, and in the movie, she has a really hard time replicating what she did. And she just kind of looks crazy to Miss Honey, and Miss Honey kind of shoos her away. But in the book, she goes to replicate it, and she just does it. She doesn't have any problem doing it whatsoever. But that kind of turns into like another weird turning point where in the movie, she practices to gain control over these powers, which leads to her using her powers a lot. And in the book, she doesn't use them nearly as much as she does in the movie. Like, only a few times, actually. In the book, she only practices her powers to battle Miss Trenchbull. And in the movie, she, like I said, she only practices them to gain more control, to use them all the time, which she freaking does. And in the movie, she ends up going to Miss Trenchbull's house and making all this weird, crazy stuff happen. And she goes inside the house and she's basically making Miss Trenchbull believe that the house is haunted. Then after that, Miss Trenchbull is at the school and she ends up doing the same thing there, ends up using her telekinetic powers, moving stuff, attacking her. Miss Trenchbull ends up leaving and all the kids are celebrating and they're throwing stuff at her. She's running down the halls and she runs off into the sunset, never to be seen again. In the book, Matilda actually never goes into Miss Trenchbull's house. It only happens in the school. She writes on a blackboard pretending to be Miss Honey's dad, trying to haunt Miss Trenchbull, and Miss Trenchbull ends up getting so freaked out she faints, and then when she wakes up, she leaves. That's it. And after the battle is all said and done, Matilda still has to live with her horrible parents. Or does she? So like I said earlier, Matilda's parents are being investigated by the FBI, and now the crap has hit the fan, and the FBI is coming for them, and it's time for them to make a run for it. And Matilda doesn't want to go. She wants to stay with Miss Honey. And in the movie, it just so happens that she has adoption papers in her back pocket. And there's this big old long sad goodbye. And it's almost like her parents are going to miss her. And you're really sad for them because they just never got along. And then Matilda ends up living happily ever after. And it shows that Matilda still has her powers and stuff, even after she leaves. And things happen a little bit differently in the book. In the book, she still ends up staying with Miss Honey, but her parents just leave. They don't really care. Like, there's no sad goodbye. There's none of that. It makes you feel good that Matilda's getting to stay with Miss Honey now instead of like her parent. Like the movie kind of makes you feel sad in a way, but in the book you just feel happy that now her parents are gone forever. And since Miss Honey is now her parent and teacher, she places Matilda in a more like gifted kind of classroom setting for people who are smarter rather than just your regular school setting where you're with the regular curriculum and all that. And because she's now being challenged more, her powers are gone, because the reason why she had powers is because it's like a symptom of her intelligence not being used to its full capabilities, I suppose would be the best way to say it. So basically she's so smart and she doesn't have an outlet to use her genius, so she developed telekinetic powers, especially when faced with an adversary like the Trenchbull. So we just went over all the differences, so now I want to talk about the things that the movie does right. And that is the atmosphere. The atmosphere of this movie is so good. When she's at her home and she's around her parents, and when her dad is talking, you just get this really just dirty, disgusting trailer park feeling, and you get the sense that her parents just really don't care, and they're all sweaty all the time. It's perfect. And then when she's at school, it's very just dark and gloomy. Kind of has like a Tim Burton feel to it almost. Like, this is very gray and black, and like the grass is dead, I think. Like, it's just really, it's the only way how you can explain it is just dark. It's just dark. And they also do a good job at showing how horrible the Trenchbull is. Like the cake eating scene when the fat kid has to sit there and eat all this cake in front of the kids. It's just horrible. It's like there's like a montage part. It's just horrible where he has to sit there and he's really tired. The cake's wearing him out. He's probably getting some sort of diabetes halfway throughout this thing. Even though the part when Matilda goes to Miss Trenchbull's house and torments her there isn't in the book, they still do that really well too. They make it like they play up the hero a lot. You know, you really hate Miss Trenchbull, and Matilda is like Superman to these kids once she starts fighting back. Not only is it really good payback, but it's just really fun to watch this horrible, like, Miss Trunchbull is huge. I think in the book she's described as like a 200-pound monster, and she kind of resembles like a football linebacker in the movie. So she's a big woman. So when you see this woman who's like sniveling and crying and terrified, it just puts a smile on your face. And even though the ending's different, that's still really perfect too, because it just, like, it makes you feel like her parents just really wanted to understand her. And I think her mom even says that too. Her mom says in the movie that she never understood her. And it kind of makes it to where it just isn't anybody's fault, like that her parents were horrible people. They just didn't get her. It's like Malcolm in the Middle. Like, they just don't understand him. And I'm having kind of a hard time rating these. Like, the book, it's a kid's book. So it isn't going to compare to like Lord of the Rings or anything like that. It'll never even come close to it. But for me, how much I enjoyed it, especially as a kid, I think it was like one of my very first novels, and I read it multiple times. I have to give it at least like a 7.8. And as far as the movie goes, the movie's good too. I mean, of course the movie could always be better, but as a standalone, I would give it, honestly, the same exact rating, a 7.8. But as far as the movie's concerned, I'd have to say a solid 7. It's good. It's not perfect. But if you've never read the book and you don't know the story, you would still enjoy it. So it's got to be a 7. And that's going to wrap it up for this review. Let me know in the comments if I forgot something, if I missed something, if I was completely wrong about something. Go ahead and leave a comment below. Let me know what you would rank these movies, if you've seen them before, or if there's any books or movies that you want me to do next. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more like it, don't forget to subscribe and click the little bell icon so you get notified whenever I do upload. I don't know why you have to click the bell icon. I guess being subscribed doesn't really do it. But yeah, don't forget to click the bell icon so you get notified. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you guys next time.
I was trapped in ignorant kid relying on my parents' said to save me. Years gone by.